In 2006, NASA banned reindeer from space, not because of some exotic contamination risk, not because of weight limits, because of Christmas. Swedish astronaut Christer Fuglesang was preparing for his first shuttle mission and got to choose which foods he wanted to bring along. He picked dried reindeer meat, totally normal where he's from. NASA said no because they were going to release the shuttle menu publicly, and if Americans learned astronauts were eating reindeer during the holiday season, they would find it distasteful. He could bring moose jerky, but not reindeer jerky. Moose was fine, reindeer was off limits, at NASA, because of a cartoon character with a red nose. That story is funny, but it's also kind of the whole point of this video. Because reindeer is genuinely delicious, you'll commonly find it on the menu in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. Reindeer meat from the Lapland region even has a protected designation of origin status in the European Union. The same protection that covers champagne and Parma ham. And yet most people in the English-speaking world act like eating reindeer is some kind of crime against Christmas. So what actually happened? How did a perfectly edible animal, one that entire civilizations have survived on for thousands of years, end up culturally untouchable in one of the richest food markets on the planet? The answer runs through a botched colonial experiment in Alaska, a Norwegian Supreme Court ruling most people have never heard of, a law that still exists today, and one of the strangest export markets in the Arctic. And, I'll tell you right now, the last thing on this list is the one that almost nobody knows about, and it changes how you think about all of it. Let's start with the thing that most directly explains why reindeer never became mainstream food in America, because this is where the story gets genuinely weird. Missionary Sheldon Jackson arranged for the importation of reindeer from Russia into Alaska in the late 1890s, pitching it as famine relief for Alaska Native communities. The idea made sense on paper. The land could support the animals, the communities knew how to herd, and reindeer meat is nutritious. But the program was never purely about food. It was wrapped up in a broader effort to reshape how Alaska Natives lived, to make them sedentary herders rather than nomadic hunters. The reindeer were the vehicle. Civilizing the people was the actual goal. And for a while, the numbers looked incredible. The high point came around 1930, when an estimated 640,000 deer roamed Alaska's western coast. Reindeer meat was actually popular in the lower 48 during this period. It was showing up in American markets. People were eating it. Then everything fell apart. Fast. Disease, predators, and intermingling with wild caribou herds gradually decreased the population of domestic reindeer. The herd that had taken decades to build collapsed within a generation. And the window where reindeer could have become a mainstream American protein just closed. But here's where it gets legally strange. White settlers had muscled into the reindeer business, which prompted Congress to pass the Reindeer Act of 1937. The act appropriated $2 million to buy all reindeer owned by non-natives in Alaska and give them to the natives, and it strictly limits the sale of reindeer to non-natives. That law is still on the books. Only Alaska Natives, organizations of Alaska Natives, or the United States for the benefit of those natives can own Alaskan reindeer in Alaska. If you are not an Alaska Native, and you somehow acquire a live Alaskan reindeer, within 30 days of transfer, you must either butcher the reindeer in Alaska or ship them out of Alaska. Most people have no idea a law like this even exists. There is a federal statute, passed in 1937, and signed by Franklin Roosevelt, that essentially says, reindeer ownership is not for you. So the industry never recovered, the legal structure locked non-natives out, and the cultural window closed. By the time American food culture was forming its modern identity in the post-war years, reindeer was already a regional Alaska specialty, not a national one, and then Rudolph showed up in 1964 and finished the job. Now, and this is where it gets interesting, the question isn't just why Americans don't eat reindeer. The question is why the UK and Ireland don't either, because they don't have the same legal history, the same colonial program, none of it. And the answer there is almost embarrassingly simple. Eating reindeer is a rarity in the US outside of Alaska, but it's slightly more common in Europe, specifically in Scandinavia. But in the UK and Ireland, it barely registers. No history of reindeer herding, no cultural connection to the animal as food, and then decades of Christmas imagery cementing reindeer as a symbol rather than a protein. The Sami people in northern Scandinavia call reindeer the cows of the north. They are livestock. They are managed, herded, slaughtered, and eaten the same way a farmer in Iowa thinks about cattle. The cultural frame is completely different. In the UK, a reindeer is what's standing next to a man in a red suit on a Christmas card. Those two framings are almost impossible to reconcile, and the Christmas card version won. This is a pattern that shows up with other animals too. Think about how 19th century American whalers thought about whales, purely as industrial oil, not food, while other cultures ate whale meat as a staple. The animal doesn't change. The cultural story around it determines whether it ends up on a plate or in a children's book. And here's the thing that keeps pulling me back to this topic. The people who do eat reindeer have built something genuinely sophisticated around it. The Sami approach to reindeer is nose-to-tail in the most complete sense. The Sami practice a nose-to-tail method when using the animal. They dry and tan reindeer skins for clothes, invert the stomach to use as a storage pouch, use the blood in pancakes served with cloudberry jam, dry the heart for porridge, and even use the hooves as tools for digging lichen. Nothing gets wasted. And the blood pancakes weren't just a recipe, they were essentially folk medicine. Iron-rich reindeer blood pancakes were traditionally fed to pregnant women, functioning as a natural iron supplement dressed up as breakfast. There was also a hierarchy inside reindeer cuisine that most people never hear about. In 17th century accounts of Sami life, the tongue and marrow were considered the greatest delicacies, the cuts you brought out when someone important came to visit. Priests showed up, you served tongue and marrow. That's the VIP treatment. The rest of the animal fed everyone else. And what does the meat actually taste like? Reindeer has a rich, earthy flavor that isn't super gamey or tough like other venison. It's milder than standard venison, but more complex than grain-fed beef, with a subtle sweetness that comes from the lichen and mosses that make up much of the animal's winter diet. For those transitioning from a standard American diet to exotic meats, reindeer is frequently cited as the most palatable, entry-level game meat. So it's not some extreme, acquired taste. It's genuinely approachable. Now I want to get to the slaughter question, because this is the part of the story that most food content skips entirely, and it involves a real clash between a country's legal system and an indigenous practice that had been refined over centuries. Traditional Sami slaughter used a method called getadit, a precision heart strike, delivered close to the herd, specifically designed to kill the animal instantly without distressing the animals around it. The logic was practical, as much as it was cultural. A calm herd is a herd that doesn't run. And because the animal died where it stood rather than in a slaughterhouse, herders could harvest the blood and organs immediately, the parts that a modern industrial facility typically discards. The method was precise, fast, and built around zero waste. Norway's Supreme Court ruled in 2008 that this method was illegal. The ruling came from animal welfare legislation that requires animals to be stunned before slaughter. The traditional method, by legal definition, didn't qualify, even though the people who developed it had spent generations optimizing it for exactly the outcome animal welfare law is trying to achieve. That tension between written law and lived practice is real, and it's one of the more honest windows into how food systems and indigenous traditions collide in ways that don't have clean answers. Now, remember I said there was one thing on this list that almost nobody knows about? We're here. Reindeer antler velvet is exported to Asia, where it is considered an aphrodisiac. That's the polished version of the story. The actual version is stranger. 1. Sami herder turned writer describes the process in detail. The smallest antlers, the ones not worth keeping whole, get ground into powder and shipped overseas, specifically marketed to infertile businessmen. You have a Sami herder in the Arctic, processing antlers from animals their family has herded for generations, and the end destination is a wellness market on the other side of the planet. That supply chain, from tundra to supplement capsule, is genuinely one of the more surreal things the reindeer economy produces. And it's completely real. And then there's the fly agaric mushroom story, which sounds like something someone made up but is grounded in actual chemistry. Reindeer actively seek out and eat fly agaric, the red and white spotted mushroom that looks like it belongs in a fairy tale. Their livers and kidneys filter out the most toxic compounds and concentrate the psychoactive ones, which then pass into their urine. Siberian shamanic folklore holds that shamans would collect and drink this urine to experience the effects without the dangerous toxins. The chemistry is real. The filtering does happen. The human drinking it part is where things get contested. Mycologist Andy Letcher looked into the historical record and called the reindeer urine detail a confabulation, pointing out that there's no solid evidence for it and raising the practical question of how anyone would even collect urine from a mushroom-drunk reindeer stumbling around the tundra. So, real chemistry, genuinely uncertain history, and a story that's been passed around so many times it's taken on a life of its own. There's also a quirk in the reindeer calendar that functions almost like a built-in seasonal taboo. Mature reindeer aren't slaughtered in summer because the grass they eat during warm months affects the flavor of the meat in ways most herders consider unpleasant. So traditional slaughter clusters around the spring calving season and the September migration, when the animals are at their best. It's a taste-driven seasonal restriction that got baked into practice so deeply it started to look like a rule, which is kind of how a lot of food taboos work. What starts as practical knowledge eventually becomes custom, and then custom starts to feel like law. So here's where we've landed. Reindeer is genuinely good to eat. It's commonly found on menus in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. Reindeer meat from Lapland has protected designation of origin status in the EU. It's high in B12, omega-3, and omega-6 fatty acids, and leaner than beef. The Sami built an entire sophisticated food culture around it, from blood pancakes to tongue, served to honored guests, to antler powder shipped to wellness markets overseas. And in most of the English-speaking world, it's off the table. Not because of anything about the animal itself. Because a colonial program in Alaska collapsed, a federal law locked the industry in place, and a cartoon from 1964 did the rest. The NASA story at the top of this video isn't an outlier. It's the whole thing in miniature. Even an organization that sends humans into orbit bent its logistics around the cultural image of an animal that most Americans have never eaten, and never will. Not because they can't, but because Rudolph made it feel wrong. That's not biology. That's not nutrition. That's just a story that got told loudly enough for long enough that it became a rule nobody wrote down. If this kind of thing, the hidden history behind why we eat what we eat, is something you want more of, there's a video right next to this one that goes deep on a completely different animal with a similarly strange story. It's worth watching back to back. And if you've actually eaten reindeer, or you live somewhere it's completely normal, drop it in the comments, because I genuinely want to know what people outside of Scandinavia and Alaska think of it when they finally try it. Hit subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.